From the get-go, I'd just like to say a very big thank you to one of the companies that make all these videos on this channel happen. That's BOTB.com. You may have noticed over the last 2 decades, if you've been milling around airport lobbies, as I tend to do, I've done a lot of over these years, various supercars and classic cars. Well, that's what BOTB.com is. They're only online now, which makes things a lot simpler, I think. Tickets start at £1.50. It's basically a dream car competition, but there are 150 cars at any given moment that you could win. There are 2 competitions a week, and the ticket prices start at £1.50, and there's up to £50,000 worth of cash in the boot of any car that you're lucky enough to win. So it's a brilliant thing. They've been around for a long time. I think they've given away something like £38 million over the last 2 decades. So it's a serious company with serious cars and serious winners. I've got my eye, as you can imagine, on something like a 1969 911, but I'd be prepared to settle for, I don't know, a 65 Mustang, yeah, if I really had to. And in the boot of that, there will be that cash, of course. All the details are in the description below this video, but I counsel you to go to BOTB.com. It is an amazing thing just to be able to win these cars at a very, very small outlay. So good luck. Now, moving swiftly on to the Portuguese Grand Prix, where Lewis Hamilton scored another of those trademark wins of his, where afterwards Valtteri Bottas could only say, we've got to study the data, see what happened, don't know where the pace went. Well, the pace went in time management, and time management is all about those supple inputs that Lewis has over Valtteri. He was just brilliant in the way he massaged the car and still got the lap time out of it. I don't think, well, there will be some other drivers from this afternoon that I think we should talk about in that area, but Lewis just does that so well. On a day when it was very, very easy to take the edge off the medium tire, as we saw with Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, who just sank like a stone when he went to the mediums after his start on the soft tire. Lewis was the ultimate example of how to get the car absolutely as straight as possible before you put the power on or do anything with it. Patience, yes, that's one thing, but beyond that, it was the feel and the angle at which he was getting the car, or the angle at which he wasn't getting the car at the very important moment where the power comes in. And here I should actually have a shout out for Sergio Perez, who made the medium tire last for something like 54 laps. And that is indicative of the way Sergio has always been able to put the power down. He has this natural talent for being able to get the loaded rear absolutely in harmony with what he's doing with the right foot. But now Lewis Hamilton is right up there in that department as well. A few years ago, we were saying, qualifying, maybe Nico Rosberg's got a little bit over Lewis, and then looking at a couple of areas as well. But look at the way Lewis has improved and the way he can manage tyres now. I think we saw today in Portugal a better tyre management day from Lewis than we've ever had anywhere. Actually, I thought it was just a brilliant drive from start to finish. The only blemish, of course, was getting caught a little bit unawares by Max Verstappen at the well, let's go back to the start anyway, because it was a great race in terms of some overtaking. The DRS worked really well on the main straight, and turn 1 is this very, very quick right-hander. You can defend to the right and then just get blasted past on the racing line. There's not a lot you can do on a quick corner like that. Carlos Sainz did a reasonable job of defense there, but for everybody else, it was sort of one of these, and you really had no chance. You were sitting ducks, as Max Verstappen described it when he got repassed early on. Anyway, going back to the start, Valtteri made a pretty clean start. Lewis got in behind him, but great off the line by Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. Both of them really good in that first half lap, picking up places and looking like real racers. It was a really, really good bit of motor racing. Then we had Kimi Räikkönen making the unforgivable error of hitting the back of his teammate's car on the straight, taking the front wing off the Alpha and pulling up on the outside of turn 1. Safety car came out. So they were out for about 4 or 5 laps. Tire temperatures were down. It was pretty windy. There were a lot of variables in the air, and we don't often see passes at restarts, but we did on this occasion. Absolutely fabulous by Max Verstappen round the outside of Lewis Hamilton. You don't see that. Well, you don't see that ever, really, let alone at a restart. But Max did it. I think one of the reasons we did see passing at the restart is because it is a quick corner. That turn 1 is a quick corner. So again, circuit designers, take note. Let's have turn 1s really quick, because it worked beautifully for the restart there. So Max is now up to P2 and putting a lot of pressure on Valtteri Bottas, all 3 of them on medium tyre, of course. And at this point, you're thinking, okay, at the end of Friday practice at the end of FP2, remember that message that went out to Sergio Perez that Max is about 0.6 quicker than the Mercedes on the long runs. Well, was that going to be the case? Unfortunately not, from the point of view of Red Bull, Honda. Mercedes had a really, really good setup for these conditions, and Lewis was maximizing it, and very, very quickly he started to regain some momentum. Once he got temperature back in the tires, he was all over Max. Max made a small mistake at the end of a lap coming out of turn 14, and Lewis gazumped him in return. And then it was about time management at Mercedes. Valtteri leading, Lewis behind him. I think some people were saying, oh, as the fuel load lightens, the balance is changing for Valtteri. It was none of that. It was all about the way the inputs will have a chronic effect on the way the tyre degradation is going to work. And Lewis was just doing so much better. It's a natural thing. He wasn't looking at what Valtteri's doing. He wasn't getting any information from the pits along these lines. He was just driving the car as he drives it, feeling the surface of the road, and it paid off. He just had so much more grip and balance and poise as well when he was in the traffic and in the back markers. So then it was relatively easy for Lewis with DRS going into turn 1 to do the same thing to Valtteri. And after that, Valtteri was kind of confused, a bit lost, I think. He was talking about the car feeling very slow in a straight line. There was an issue with an oil temperature sensor, and on one lap he lost something like 2 seconds, compounded by Yuki Tsunoda going off in front of him. But, you know, right at the end, they put Valtteri out on the soft tyre to do a fastest lap, and he did set fastest lap. He was actually a few thousandths of a second slower than Max, but they deducted Max's time. He came in for red tyres right at the end, little mini qualifying session, red hot laps right at the end of the race. Great to see, 1 point at stake, of course. But Max ran wide coming out of turn 14. As he said afterwards, well, they weren't regulating track limits at turn 14, were they? And yeah, I kind of agree with him now, but anyway, he lost that lap, and that fastest lap in that point went to Valtteri Bottas. So you got to say there wasn't that much wrong with Valtteri's engine right at the end of the race. Anyway, so Lewis Hamilton, excellent win. This is the first proper win for Lewis we've had this year, if you like. And it was interesting to hear him say after the race, we've got so much work to do, which I think is Lewis talking about there's a very, very small sweet spot in the car at the moment to get it absolutely right, to get it to the point where they can actually beat a Red Bull. So I think that's what Lewis is talking about. It'd be interesting to see how they go around Barcelona, a circuit they all know well, but which they haven't tested yet. In theory, the Red Bull should be really quick there as well. Let's talk a little bit about the Red Bull. We talked yesterday about Max not being able to get everything out of the car. Lewis, you could say the same thing after qualifying. And in the race, I think you saw the Red Bull at its absolute maximum, which is, yeah, driven by Valtteri Bottas, a Mercedes will get beaten by a Max Verstappen Red Bull. But with Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, if he's in front and if he's got no issues going on, it's going to be very, very close. If Max had been in front, I think he would have been done in a straight line. So I think that also points to Mercedes having an engine advantage. It showed up in Portimao. Whether it'll show up at other circuits, we don't know. Certainly the first two, Imola and Bahrain, you'd have to say that the Honda wasn't that far behind. But here, if you just came in from Mars and watched this race exclusively, you'd say, looks like Mercedes has got a bit more power than the Honda. And no doubt Red Bull will be thinking that after the race as well. So very good P2 for Max in terms of getting everything out of the car. Brilliant for Lewis. Valtteri, P3, yeah, well, he did his job, didn't he? He made it reasonably hard for Max at various stages of the race, and he did get the pole, I guess, which was a good thing too. And Sergio Perez went round to finish fourth. Different strategy. They maximised his ability to use tyres the way they did, and he finished fourth. So it was 2 Mercedes and 2 Red Bulls in the top 4. But who was best of the rest? Well, again, that honour went to McLaren Mercedes, Lando Norris. An outstanding drive. Again, he started on the soft tyre, which was always going to be a disadvantage around the traffic that he was in. But he maximised that. I mean, if you saw Carlos Sainz's race, started on the soft, went to the medium, dropped like a stone, as I say, through the field. Lando Norris, you've got to say, probably hurt by the same performance comparison in terms of the soft medium not being anything like as effective as the medium hard as the way to drive this Portuguese Grand Prix. And yet he was still Best of the rest, P5, really, really good drive by Lando. As I said, before the season started, I think a lot of people were underrating how well Lando was going to adapt to the Mercedes power and everything that's going on, and having Daniel Ricciardo in the other car. And if you're Daniel Ricciardo now, you are thinking, wow, where did that go? I thought it was really interesting, the number of radio messages they were giving to Daniel, who was sort of midfield, doing a pretty good job, looking pretty racy at various stages on television. Anyway, you heard his engineer was saying a lot, looking really good, Daniel, the pace is there, great passes, this and that. I mean, what they weren't saying to him was, yeah, but Fernando Alonso's behind you, matching everything you're doing and actually going quicker when he's in free air. And so it proved. Fernando passed Daniel relatively easily and then pulled away from him, but that's another story. We'll get on to Fernando in a minute. But I think that puts Lando's drive even more into context. If Daniel Ricciardo in the McLaren Mercedes, without any mechanical dramas, feeling pretty good about his day and driving well and making a few passes, Carlos Sainz, very good example. If Daniel Ricciardo is only able to finish ninth, that enhances massively the performance by Lando Norris, and his lap times proved it. He was really, really quick relative to Daniel. So another incredible drive by Lando Norris. Can't speak highly enough of him. And then behind Lando, catching Lando a little bit, but then fading in the last 10 laps or so of the race, Charles Leclerc, another under the radar, typical Charles Leclerc drive in what was obviously a very difficult car, as we saw with Carlos Sainz, quick in qualifying, but in terms of race pace. But Charles put his head down. He'd lost some qualifying pace by going onto the medium tyre in Q2, and he maximised that on Sunday, medium to hard. He got the ultimate out of that Ferrari today. But what can we say from that? The McLaren beat Ferrari. The McLaren Mercedes is a quicker car than the Ferrari around Portimao over a full Grand Prix distance. And that is credit to Lando, of course, as well. But we had Charles Leclerc showing if you want to have the maximum for that Ferrari, this is what it can do. And then we come to Alpine, who actually finished 7th and 8th, which is kind of where they were always going to finish. I guess they might have got ahead of Charles Leclerc if Fernando Alonso had had a better qualifying day yesterday. We started on Friday by saying Fernando is really quick. He's looking good. It's the Fernando who's found his rhythm in the car, but it didn't happen yesterday, which was a bit worrying. But today he was just devastating. He never ever gave up. I thought it was interesting after the race to hear his engine. I think it was Mark Slade saying really, really good performance, Fernando. Great first phase of the race as well. Well, I would say even better last phase of the race. He was incredible. But on the last lap of the race, when we've got Max out on the red tyre, we've had Bottas out on the red tyre, Fernando Alonso 21.0. By comparison, Daniel on that last lap 22.8. Lewis was doing 22s, no surprise there. Sergio Perez 21.7, just cruising it. Fernando Alonso, the second quickest guy on the circuit at the end of the race. Okay, he had a terrible qualifying session yesterday, but he was clean, he was decisive, and he was incredibly consistent. So for a guy who's been around as long as he has, this was, I think, one of the best days Fernando Alonso has ever had in his racing career. And he was catching Esteban Ocon big time at the end. Esteban will probably think and say, oh yeah, well, I was backing off, looking after this, looking after that. And probably he was. But could he have matched Fernando's pace? I very much doubt it. I mean, he was really, really fast. What we need to see now, of course, is Fernando getting on top of qualifying. And the question is, why was he so slow in qualifying? I talked yesterday about the wind and the traffic. And I guess it was that. You know, I guess all this management of the lap, when you go out, how you try not to get affected by the traffic, is something that it's a skill that's developed, as I said yesterday, kind of much more recently to a peak if you've got a really good engineer with whom you're working and you can really get a trust and a harmony in terms of the gap and when to go and when not to go. There's another point here, it's an interesting one. I was thinking about it overnight, and it was a result of a comment Max made in qualifying when he was saying Lewis was backing up too much. Does he really need to back up that much? By which he means very, very slow to get a gap in front of him and then gunning it for the quick lap. I've been wondering if there is a specific moment down to the metre or half metre, which the engineers work out from a simulator, perhaps with the driver, when they know they have to be absolutely on it. Or is it left to a sort of variable within, oh, well, you know, just do it before you get to the last corner or in the middle of the last corner. Don't brake too late into the last corner, just accelerate. I wonder how that works, and I wonder whether that's an area where Fernando, having been away from Formula One, hasn't yet really got his sweet spot, because that for sure is an art, when to time the moment that you actually gun the car, because that affects, of course, the tire temperatures and the brake temperatures front to rear. He's got really good people around him at Alpine, all the good Renault Benetton guys, well, not Benetton, but Renault guys, and he'll get on top of that very quickly, I'm sure. But now, having had that race, after that qualifying session, you can be sure that Fernando will be 1,000% focused on qualifying in Barcelona. He'll be really looking forward to the Spanish Grand Prix, won't he? And I've got to say also, there was a moment, there's a camera angle when they're coming out of the last corner and they're coming down the hill out of that very quick right-hander. Every time we saw Fernando sort of in the background, it looked very like a Tyrrell 007, I thought. And it looked like turn one at Mosport. I don't know if that's relevant to anything, but I just thought I'd say that. For those of you that never saw what a Tyrrell 007 looked like around Mosport, that's kind of what it looked like. Anyway, there we go. And let's have a look at some of the other drives from the day. Yeah, a bit of a ho-hum day for AlphaTauri this occasion. They had a bad day and Pierre Gasly still finished 10th. So that's a sign of progress, isn't it? It's always interesting to see drivers or teams on days when the car isn't going that well, isn't that well suited to the circuit or whatever they want to say. And they're still in the points, well, a point anyway. So very good drive by Pierre Gasly again, but not the greatest of days for AlphaTauri. Carlos Sainz finished out of the points 11th. I mean, it was a sort of flip side to his qualifying session yesterday. And, this will be a confusing result for Carlos, because he'll come away thinking, I've got the pace, I out-qualified Charles, but what happened in the race? Data. And he'll sort of go down the Valtteri Bottas route, I think, of looking at all the data to try to work out what happened. They'll probably conclude that running the soft and then the medium was too much of too steep a hill to climb. But I think it was more than that. I think it was also the way he drives and the inputs he puts into the tyres when they're right on the edge, when the fuel load is full, and that is what I think we saw today with Carlos. And I don't think that's going to change, to be honest. Antonio Giovinazzi did a good job in the Alpha, finished 12th. And Sebastian Vettel sort of was there or thereabouts for a while and then also faded, kind of on the wrong strategy as well, soft and then medium. And Lance Stroll finished right behind him, so Aston Martins were 13th and 14th. Yuki Tsunoda went round and round, had a couple of moments, 15th. George Russell was complaining all day his car was undrivable, his Williams, and he held off Mick Schumacher, who was not that far behind him. Well, he was quite far behind him, actually, at the end. Mick actually had the better of Nicholas Latifi towards the end of the race and got past when Nicholas ran wide. And Nikita Mazepin just got in the way again. And ridiculous chop he gave Sergio Perez. He only got a 5-second penalty for that. I mean, given all the warnings the drivers now have of a quick car behind them, I think it should be much more than 5 seconds when you do something like that. I mean, there's Sergio, who's been nursing his tyres throughout, well, 3/4 of the race, and he's obliged to get into a flat spot mode just to avoid Nikita Mazepin, who's not looking. We used to say not looking in his mirrors, but I suppose we can't say that anymore because they can't see anything in the mirrors anyway. I don't know what. Well, then he's not getting the right instructions or whatever. So that was the Portuguese Grand Prix. Really good race, actually. Very good circuit, lovely people. Sad to see it empty, but nonetheless, when you're actually in there watching it all and you're seeing them all close up, you don't really notice that, I guess. It is what Bernie always used to say. It's the television show, and we're all there in the background just watching it on screens. So this is Nirvana, I guess, for Bernie Ecclestone. Was it Nirvana for Lewis Hamilton? I think it was, because this was a day when you really had to work hard with the wind, with the tyre deg, managing the tyres. Max Verstappen passing him on the outside would have been a bit of a shock. But then he just drove this amazing race to get it all right. And Lando Norris, superb as well. Charles Leclerc, brilliant. And Fernando Alonso, good to have you back, Fernando. Excellent. We had you on the thumbnail for the Friday vid. I don't suppose we can do it for this one, but nonetheless, it made the hair on my arms stand up when we saw how well Fernando was driving. And they didn't really get onto it, I think, till late in the race. But even mid-race, he was just putting in the most amazing lap times with great consistency. And you could watch him and just see he can get into a corner a little bit too quick, but he has this amazing ability, foot and handwork, subtle inputs, foot and handwork, just to get the car absolutely where it should be, even though he's overdone it a little bit. That's an incredibly rare talent. Lewis has that as well. Charles has that. But it's great to see that Fernando's still there, still that racing driver. So good race. See you soon. We've got the Spanish Grand Prix next weekend.